Hello and welcome to a brand new video. Today we'll discuss The Prince by Machiavelli. We'll break down the key ideas from each of the 26 chapters of The Prince, exploring Machiavelli's views on power, leadership, and morality, and how far a ruler should go to maintain control. And basically the it's an essay on how a prince should gain loyalty and keep it. And then he gives like a list of what a prince should do and what kind of characteristics he should have to gain loyalty. And then he turns around and gives a bunch of points on how a prince may need to resort to cruelty to keep said loyalty. And then he gives examples from both past and present rulers to back up his points. And overall, political leaders should prioritize effectiveness and stability over moral ideas. And basically it's the idea that the ends justify the means. So in the beginning of the book, Machiavelli distinguishes between new rulers from hereditary ones. And he argues that hereditary princes have an easier time maintaining power unless they're like really bad. And Machiavelli then describes like mixed princedoms as like new territories added to existing states. And he gives like strategies and like for maintaining power and control. And he gives an example of like Rome, who set up colonies while they have also suppressed like powerful and prevented like foreign influence. And he wants the rulers or the prince to anticipate future problems rather than relying on time to solve them. So Machiavelli distinguishes between two types of conquered kingdoms: those where power is shared amongst lords, and those where the ruler has absolute control. And the former is easier to conquer but harder to control, while the latter is harder to conquer but easier to maintain once the ruling dynasty is eliminated. So the prince has to eliminate the old bloodlines to secure rule over centralized states. Then he argues that conquering free states with their own laws is kind of difficult, as people are accustomed to their freedom. So he presents three options for ruling over them. So you either destroy them completely, as what Rome did to Carthage, you personally govern them, or install an oligarchy. And he strongly recommends destruction, and warning that if a prince allows for such a state to thrive, it will eventually seek revenge and overthrow him. Furthermore, princes who rise through their own skill and virtue rather than luck face challenges in reaching power, but they are more secure when they do. And this is because their strength and self-sufficiency allows them to dominate opponents and avoid compromising with allies. So the opposite is also true. Princes who rise to power through fortune or the support of powerful benefactors often struggle to maintain their position as authority because their authority depends on other people. And these princes lack loyalty from their own forces, and they might not have all the skills to sustain their role. So Machiavelli also advises that if a prince commits a cruel deed, he should carry out swiftly and decisively to avoid constant suspicion and to protect his rule. So the prince who hesitates to act ruthlessly will always be at risk. And the prince that has support by the common people has a better chance of holding power than the one that's supported by nobles alone, as the nobles are harder to satisfy and can be hostile. So to maintain power, the prince must be able to keep the people on his side, and while carefully managing the nobles, and distinguishing between those who are loyal and those who are threats. And the prince should avoid ruling through magistrates and ensures that people are dependent upon him and act decisively in times of adversity. And then the strength of a principality is determined by its ability to defend itself independently and without relying on external allies. And Machiavelli advises that a prince should focus on war and military preparation, not merely intellectual pursuits, those are important. He suggests that a prince should stay physically fit by hunting and familiarizing himself with the landscape, and study past military leaders to learn from their successes and from their mistakes. And a prince is one who is the prince who is like disarmed or weak is the one who's despised. And to earn the loyalty of soldiers, a prince must have good understanding of the military matters. And this might hurt Immanuel Kant's feelings, but he also says that striving for absolute good is a mistake because people are not good, and such approach will inevitably lead to a ruler's downfall. And he emphasizes that a prince must sometimes act immorally or ruthlessly when necessary, and that these actions, even though they might tarnish the prince's reputation, are essential for maintaining power. And basically the key is to balance between the reputation and necessity, and sometimes choosing an evil thing is good if it ensures that the survival and stability of the state. And going on off of that, he argues that a prince that is overtly generous will ultimately harm his reputation in the state. So excessive generosity leads to increased demand and expectation, resulting in higher taxes, which will cause resentment of the people. And if the prince tries to scale back his generosity, he's going to be labeled as a miser, which could further damage his image. So a prince would prefer to be as a miser rather than risk being hatred for being too generous. So, and also a prince should rather use, if he was going to give, a charity, he should use someone else's wealth, like conquered wealth that's accumulated through conquering, rather than his own wealth as well. And he also discusses another dichotomy between like cruelty and mercy, and that the balance between these two. So for a prince, he advises that cruelty, when used, can be strategic, and it can be essential for maintaining power and control and ensuring stability in the state. And he begins by discussing the dangers of excessive mercy, noting that it can harm the prince's authority and instability. And Machiavelli famously argued that it's better to be feared than to be loved, provided that one can't be both. And then the reason behind this is people are less likely to betray or harm someone that they fear as opposed to someone that they love. And that's because of the commitments made out of fear are more likely to be kept than those made out of someone that they love. However, he also warns that a prince shouldn't be overly cruel, that he becomes hated, because that would lead to rebellion. So he acknowledges that a prince is praised for his honesty, but he also argues that the most successful princes are willing to becoming cunning or deceitful when necessary. So according to Machiavelli, a prince shouldn't feel bound to keep his word, especially if it no longer serves his purpose. Instead, he should do his best to maintain the illusion that he is truthful and trustworthy, even though his actions are deceitful. So Machiavelli advises that a prince should be suspicious of any hostile attitudes or signs of dissent amongst his people. So the majority of people, according to Machiavelli, are generally content as long as their property or women are not threatened. But it's only like a small number that are ambitious and pose a real threat or concern. Therefore, a prince should aim to maintain respect and satisfaction of both the nobles and the common people, ensuring that there's no conspiracies against him. But it's nearly impossible to be fully loved. There's always some hater out there. And while a prince should be strive to be avoid to be hated by the common folk, he'll eventually make enemies. And speaking of those enemies, he should avoid being hated by the most powerful groups in his realm, particularly the military, as their opposition can be the most dangerous. So a prince should have the wisdom to identify the ventures that offer the greatest potential reward and pursue them with courage, and while also understanding when to forge alliances and when to act independently as well. So Machiavelli also discusses the importance of a prince's choice of servants and advisors, and that the selection of those people, and it reflects the prince's intelligence. So if the prince's servants are loyal and effective, it demonstrates the prince's wisdom. And conversely, if the servants are disloyal or they're incompetent, then this opens the prince up for criticism and potentially downfall. So on that point, Machiavelli emphasizes the dangers of flattery and flatterers and how they can be harmful to the prince. So he critiques the tendency of people to be deceived by their own self-interest and leading them to fall prey to flattery. And flatterers, according to Machiavelli, can only distort the prince's judgment and making him avoid the wise counsel in favor of rash decisions made by the flatterers. Machiavelli also cautioned against avoiding all advice, the opposite, including flattery, as that would be equally detrimental. And the prince should aim to have a balanced approach, and he should have, as I said previously, a wise group of conductors or advisors to help him along his path as a prince. And then the opinions of the advisors should be trustworthy, and then they should be, but the final decision should rest with the prince. And Machiavelli stresses that a prince who frequently changes his mind would also have a bad reputation, and because it portrays indecisiveness and weakness. And the prince should be able to distinguish between good advice and bad advice as well. So Machiavelli encourages risk-taking, and that's the ability of, and the best princes throughout history are those that often take risk and use that risk to try to gain power. And it also reflects their ability to adapt to changing circumstances and their willingness to take calculated risks. So at the end, Machiavelli makes a direct appeal to Pope Leo X and the Medici family, and he urges them to use their political power and resources to unite Italy and expel foreign invaders. So as you can tell based off my summary, Machiavelli's approach is pragmatic, strategic, and often ruthless. And I appreciate his candidness about the complexity of power. He doesn't idealize being a ruler or the concept of leadership, but he presents in a world where moral considerations are secondary to maintaining control and stability. And there's a deep skepticism of traditional morality. I think Nietzsche would probably appreciate that if he was to read this book. And and this is why Machiavelli's The Prince can be seen as morally corrosive, because it's rejection of traditional morals. But it's also important to recognize that Machiavelli, he was writing in some time of political instability, so maybe he's just a product of his environments. and some of his ideas may be extreme, but they're also like relevant and understanding how leaders should navigate challenges. And it's like a foundational text in understanding political strategy or governance. And really, nature hasn't changed in 500 years, and people are still as conniving or selfish or egotistical as they were back then. So maybe his advice is still relevant to us. And he's not really telling the Medici family or the king or France or the Pope what to do. He's not telling them to be a good man, but he's telling them what they can do to keep their power and how leaders are judged based off how well they do serving the people. And it doesn't matter, it matters like less of how nasty the leader is than how a good person he is. So a good man who is a bad prince is not a good man. That's what something Machiavelli would probably say. And some say, like, I'm pretty sure, it's Spinoza and Rousseau insisted that the prince was a satire. But to me, it doesn't really read like a satire. But then again, I'm not reading it in its proper environments or in the 16th century. That's in the 16th century and in the correct language. I'm just reading a translation. And that brings us to the end of this video. Hopefully you learned something about Machiavelli and the prince. And hopefully if you become a leader, I'm not going to vote for you. And that's basically it. And don't forget to like and subscribe as always.